Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Last presentation of the day, so I don't know who I get to thank for that one. The bad news is my team put together a very long list of slides. The good news is I have a timer which I must remember to put on just to save your all. But
Thank you.
thanks. So firstly, thanks for inviting me along today. It's great to be here. It's a great location. Actually, I went for a little walk this morning and it kind of reminded me of the work that we all do and the importance of it and the benefit of just getting out to the outdoors. And even just listening to everybody here today, there's quite a lot happening that I wouldn't have been aware of, and it's great to see the innovation and the work that's happening throughout Ireland and the UK. So my presentation is, as Joanne said, it's about embracing Ireland's outdoors. It was touched on in the first presentation. I think the speaker said it was the boring part of her presentation. So I don't know what that means for my presentation, but we shall see. I'm not actually going to talk about the details of the strategy itself. You can all read that if you want. And as it happens, there's, I would say, 6 or 7 people in the audience today who actually spent a lot more time writing this and putting it together than I did. So I'd be afraid of getting a lot of things wrong. But really, just what I am going to talk about is a little bit about the process, a little bit about data and the importance of data in developing the strategy, and then the organisers asked me to say a little bit about the new outdoor recreation structures that we are putting in place. So just the reason for the strategy in the first place, it was a commitment in our National Rural Development Policy, our Rural Future. I think it was a commitment in the Programme for Government as well, but I could be corrected on that. The last strategy was back in 2006, and it was the Countryside Recreation Strategy. And that was successful to a degree, and a lot of the actions that were identified in that are still issues today, and it set the scene quite well. I think there was a review done on it, and I think what that showed, amongst a number of things, was there was a lot of disparate elements in the sector, and I think it's a point that Maya from Northern Ireland made earlier on. There's quite a lot of different actors in the sector in Ireland. So putting all them together and getting the right structures and resources behind the previous strategy probably was the problem. So we're quite focused in developing this strategy on providing an overarching framework that brings all of those partners together and to ensure that whatever we do put into the strategy is actually delivered. And the second part of that was ensuring that it came from and was developed by the stakeholders so that there was buy-in to it. And in that regard, it was what we call a stakeholder-led strategy. It was facilitated by my department, Department for Rural and Community Development, but it was very much drafted and developed by Comhairle na Tuatha. For those who aren't familiar with Comhairle na Tuatha, it's the National Countryside Council in Ireland, so it's representatives from all of the main players really in the outdoor recreation sector, from private landowners, public landowners, user groups, government departments, state bodies. Have been doing some great work over the last few years. And when we say stakeholder-led, like every strategy in a way has stakeholder involvement. I've been involved in a number of them where there's a committee that oversees the development of the strategy that involves stakeholders, but this is different in my view, quite innovative in that it was really drafted by the stakeholders. Comhairle na Tuatha had an oversight group which was chaired by Dahi here, and the vice chair was Helen. So they were overseeing the development of the strategy. They were writing the recommendations in collaboration with all the other members of the steering group in Comhairle and ourselves. We were supported by Outscape in doing that. Dahi and Helen and others were with us, meeting other government departments, talking about the actions that were going to be in it, which is something you wouldn't normally see. And actually when we were, I don't know if Helen and Dahi know this, when we were suggesting this to other departments, there was always a raised eyebrow, but it was the right way to do it, and I hope the strategy reflects that. There was thematic groups set up in Comhairle to look at the different 6 thematic areas that were identified by the steering group. There was national and regional stakeholder workshops. So I think something like 100, 120 different organisations represented at those. And then 2 online surveys. The first one was to look at the general direction of what people thought should be in the strategy, and there was 2,000 responses to that. And then when we had formulated, or when the team had formulated the general direction of it, there was a subsequent survey which we got over 600 responses to. So it really was well informed by stakeholder views, and it was done in collaboration with other government departments to the interdepartmental group. So just in terms of the data, At the start of the strategy, one thing that we were very concerned about is, look, we need to demonstrate what the sector does. I think intuitively people know it's a good thing, probably good for your health, gets people outdoors, but what does it mean in practice? And we have some good high-level data, we don't have enough of it. The work that Benny is doing is going to make a real difference to the collection of data that we have. There's different figures up there, I won't go through them all. But for, from the perspective of my department, my minister, she's very anxious that we can give that message to other departments, we can give that message to organisations like yourselves, we can give that message to stakeholders and users. There's a lot of investment going into the sector. When the minister is going to her cabinet colleagues looking for investment, these are the details that we need. When we're looking at where we're going to put the investment, these are the details that we need. Just when we're talking about investment, huge level of investment in the sector over the last few years. Like the department I work in now, 4 or 5 years ago there was no investment in outdoor, well, there was a very small amount of investment in outdoor recreation. Over the last 4 years we've done something like 115 million. So that's going from a standing start to 150 million. And across government, 1.6 billion. Now that does include active travel and greenway expenditure as well. But it gives you an idea of the scale of investment and the seriousness with which government treats the outdoor recreation sector in Ireland. And just maybe to say a little bit about what we do in the department in terms of funding. We have an outdoor recreation infrastructure scheme which provides funding to community groups, state bodies, local authorities, firstly for developing infrastructure projects, trails, greenways, blueways, mountain access routes, access to beaches and rivers and lakes and all of that. And it provides the funding for delivering those, so projects up to about €500,000, and that's been going for 5 or 6 years now. It's been hugely successful. The other thing we do, amongst a number of things, is the walk scheme. So I don't know if many of you are familiar with that. It's a payment that we give to landowners in Ireland. So as some of the earlier speakers would have said, most or a lot of the trails that we have in Ireland go through private land owned by farmers, be that commonage where there's a number of farmers on mountain type areas, or individual farms. So what the walk scheme does is it provides funding to the farmer to maintain that trail going through his land, his or her land. So it gives them an input, it gives them, it's not just people walking through their land without their direct involvement in it. So it builds their buy into it, and I think it's recognition of the role that those private landowners take in providing access to their land. So like I said, there was a lot, I don't expect you to be able to read that. I said there was a lot, there's some good data at an action level. We need to do more to dive into that, to show what's happening, particularly in outdoor recreation. But what we do have good data on is impact in terms of case studies and examples, and there's a number of them there on the screen. But there's some great work happening throughout the country, some great examples of it. I think what we're minded to do within the strategy is to put the framework in to support that, so that this can be replicated throughout the country. Again, that's the vision of the strategy and our mission. That's just there to point towards what we're trying to achieve here. We need to measure it, and that's what the work that all of you are doing is so important for us. So we're talking about realising the social benefits, the health benefits, the economic benefits. If we don't know what that is, it's very hard for me, it's very hard for our minister. It's very hard for all of you, I'm sure, as well, to make the case for the investment to go into this area. So that is more and more important, including in how we deliver the strategy and the things that we do in it. So look, there's the strategy itself was divided up into, this is where I need to get, just quickly grab it off, so we'll talk about actions on this, is never so easy. So there's 6 thematic areas that were developed for the strategy. And for each of those areas, what we have said is, in 5 years' time, what are we going to see under those thematic areas for a number of different aims or goals under those themes. So, for example, in the environment theme, one of the things we say, in 5 years' time, will we see an agreed model? We will see an agreed model for sustainable management of recreation in upland areas. And under that then there's a list of actions, so things like expanding the mountain access project that we have in Ireland, which is a model to try and support sustainable use of recreation areas and upland areas. And there's a pilot scheme for landowners where we've given them payments for managing those upland areas. So that's what happens throughout all of the thematic areas in the strategy. In terms of the leadership objective, That's very much around the structures that we're putting in place at the national level, the new partnership approach that we have with Sport Ireland, which we value very much and I think is going to be very beneficial in the coming years, and also the local structures that I will try to get to shortly, which is why I should probably skip through some of these slides. In terms of the environmental thematic area, again, no need to tell this audience the importance of protecting the environment and everything that we do in the outdoor recreation space, and there's a range of actions linked to that as well. In terms of awareness, and the first presentation touched on this as well from Louise, some of the actions in there linked to that is very much around better access to information for our people about what those opportunities are, and the digital database that's been developed by Sport Ireland is going to be vital to that, and utilising that and sharing it and making the best use of it is really the challenge for all of us in the coming years. Also in terms of data around awareness, the importance of responsible behaviour. We had a good presentation from Liam Trace earlier on, and colleagues are probably sick of me saying this, but we really need to understand what influences behaviour. How do we change behaviour? And there's a whole science behind that. And we do some things well, but we've been doing this for decades now, and some things aren't changing, particularly around things like dog control. So we need good data to try and figure out what do we need to do differently to try and make an impact. And then, in terms of opportunities, again, that's similar to what Louise was speaking about earlier on. The need to get underrepresented groups to utilise outdoor recreation opportunities. In terms of access, always an issue in every country, I would say, and quite a range of actions under that. In terms of data, we're undertaking a research at the minute to look at the approach to access in a number of other different countries, and we hope to have that finalised shortly. But we're doing all sorts of investment in expanding walking trails, like the walk scheme that I mentioned earlier. 3 years ago there was 40 trails on that. We're soon going to have 150 trails. So in a short number of years, we really are expanding. And just to speak to Robert's point earlier on, and the question that he raised from the floor about to try and increase that access, I think if we implement the actions that are in the strategy, I think that's going to have a real impact. It's not legislation to enforce, but it is providing the structures and the incentives to try and increase that access. So we hope that will be successful. Just quickly, the expertise team itself has a range of different actions that are all very much linked to data, and I think it's the recognition that we know we need to do more. We need to learn a little bit more about the impact and support and to underline the work that everybody is doing in the sector, and to leverage that investment and that engagement from other stakeholders. We are very shortly going to launch a tender for a study on the mental health, physical health, economic and social benefits of outdoor recreation. We're doing that with our colleagues in Sport Ireland. We're giving them the money and they're doing all the work, I think, is the arrangement we have in place, which suits me. Well, you haven't got done yet, Louise. But so look, there is a range of different data-linked themes, but I won't go through them now, just with the time that we have. So look, just quickly before I finish, the organisers did ask me to say a little bit on the local structures. So under the leadership team, there's quite a big focus on how do we put the structures in place to ensure that this strategy is actually going to be delivered. There's lots of good actions in there, but without delivery, we'll be here again in 5 years' time with another strategy that we're hoping will deliver rather than knowing will deliver. So as I mentioned earlier, we have at the national level, there's a new partnership approach between ourselves and Sport Ireland, which is working very well so far, now that Louise has still been nice to us all. But within counties, what we find is, it's very disparate what's happening in different areas. Even from my own perspective, we get a lot of applications for funding different outdoor recreation infrastructure in counties. We get some great projects. Other times they're not so good. Sometimes I'm wondering if, is there enough ideas coming through? So how do we get those ideas at a local level? How do we get stakeholders at a local level coming together to identify those ideas? And sometimes we get lots of applications in, and I'm wondering, is there joined up thinking here from the different areas that they're coming from? Sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't. So what we're going to try and utilise is best practice that's happening elsewhere and trying to utilise that at a local level. So yeah, certainly in terms of best practice, we've been, or the team that put the strategy together was very much influenced by what's happening here in Wicklow. I suppose Wicklow are ahead of the curve in some ways in that they have such a wonderful offering, as we can see here today, but they're right beside our major cities. So they've been dealing with huge numbers for a long number of years while having great opportunities for people to engage in the outdoors. So they've been dealing with the challenges around sustainable outdoor recreation for perhaps longer than other areas. So briefly, what does these new structures look like? It contains 4 different elements. We have an outdoor recreation committee, and I'll skip through this just to explain. So we have an outdoor recreation plan that's developed by this outdoor recreation committee. The outdoor recreation plan is look at what's in each county, and there's a sort of brief guides to ensure that there's consistency across the country and to ensure that what's done at a county level flows from what happens at a national level. And that's really what's going to identify and bring stakeholders together around a common set of agreed objectives. So the likes of ourselves and others who are, and this is only one part of it, but who are looking at funding decisions, you can see when the plan is made that this is something that's considered, has the buy-in from all of the local stakeholders, and gives you a little bit more confidence in what the investment is being used for. And I'm sure it's the same for stakeholders. I only had a conversation with someone earlier on, and I know the stakeholders at a local level have the same concerns. You know, is there the right decisions been taken in terms of what we're doing at a local level? The plan will be overseen by an outdoor recreation committee, similar to what is done in Wicklow at the minute. So that's bringing all of the primary stakeholders together at a local level to develop the plan and ensure that it's implemented. Those plans, I should have said, actually are being funded by our department. So they're currently, so we sort of started the process from the end of last year. So I think we've about half the counties have signed up to it so far. There's 5 or 6 more in the pipeline, so there's just a few left. So it's great to see the enthusiasm that's out there for it, and that there is good buy-in to what we're trying to do. The committee will also be supported by a stakeholder forum, which would meet less regularly, but that's a chance for everybody who has an interest in outdoor recreation within the county to come together and to inform the committee of their views on what's happening. And then lastly, you'll be glad to hear, we have county outdoor recreation officers. So this is a pilot program that we're running. We're running it in 6 counties. And the idea is that we have individuals within each county that's working with the outdoor recreation committees, that's developing the strategies and that's driving the delivery of those strategies at a local level. And what we hope to see from them is, bringing that engagement with all of the stakeholders, bringing all of the different agencies and organisations together and ensuring that the strategies are delivered. But ultimately the proof will be in the ET. So it's a pilot program, and based on the success or otherwise of that, we will roll it out to the rest of the country. So with that, that's the end of the presentation. Just to thank you all for listening to it. I'm not around later on, but my colleague Leon is here. So Leon knows 100 times more about the outdoor recreation strategy than I do. So if anybody has any hard questions, you can save them for later when you're chatting to Leon over a couple of drinks. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, JP. We have one question coming in from Slido. I think it might be, we have 2 actually. National strategy approach, but how are controls for environmental legislation and assessment built in for local projects and county councils consenting themselves? He wasn't listening to me because he was too busy doing his microphone. Isn't that right, JP?
Well, I heard a bit.
You heard a bit of it?
I heard.
No. Should we have?
Try the other one.
No,
it's working. I heard the bit I wanted to hear, I think, so.
You're going to answer the bit of the question if you like.
So yeah, exactly. I've learned that from working with politicians for the last 20 years. So, well look, 2 things to say about that. Look, there's a clear focus within the strategy around the importance of managing outdoor recreation facilities sustainably and putting procedures in place to ensure that best practice is used around environmental requirements. But we also have to remember that there's other governance other legislation and governance in place to protect all of these sites. So that again is working across government with the likes of the Department of Housing, the likes of the National Park and Wildlife Service, to ensure that the legislation that we have is enforced.
And then how are you ensuring that the investment is sustainable and not a future maintenance issue?
That's a great point. It's something that comes up all the time, and it's actually another action that's called out in the strategy. So there's huge investment going into the sector, but yeah, everybody's asking, what happens in 10 years' time when we go along? Who's going to repair all of this? So what we are doing through the strategy and what's happening already is the funding that's gone into it, part of that has been set aside to ensure that this funding is maintained. We're not fully there yet, but the schemes that I deliver, or that my team deliver, a proportion of that is there for maintenance of these trails as they go along. We have a partnership with Wicklow where we're investing in the ongoing maintenance of those trails. We're looking at developing a partnership with Board and Mona to do something similar on those lands. So it is a challenge, don't get me wrong. It's something that we have to deal with, but certainly it is something that's called out in the strategy.
And one final question, and I can imagine what the answer was, but what was the biggest challenge to putting the strategy together?
I was getting somebody else to do it, really. I know, I'm serious.
That was not the answer I was expecting.
No. The biggest challenge, and there's no doubt about this, the biggest challenge was managing a process that brings all of these different elements together. The number of stakeholders involved in this, the level of public consultation, the level of trust that's needed across all the different stakeholders, particularly those in the corner that do it to deliver this, took quite a lot of energy, and it went on for quite a lot longer than any of us would have anticipated because of that. But I hope and we think that it is to the benefit of the strategy.
Thank you so much, JP Mulherin, Head of Investment Programmes and Outdoor Recreation Unit at the Department of Rural and Community Development. Let's give him a round of applause.